So I'm Pat Kramer, and my expertise has been in the area of communication. So I have been a communications trainer for many, many years, as well as training manager in corporate America and a trainer all around the world, actually. Trained many years for Dun & Bradstreet and Career Track in 7 foreign countries and every state in the United States, focusing on communication and leadership-oriented topics. So as an English teacher, of course, the expertise is in the minutes area. I'm one of the few people, I guess, in the world who actually love to take minutes. I find it an absolutely fascinating kind of process. So I'll be sharing with you some of the things that are very important in minute taking. We'll be covering something called Robert's Rules in this session because that's part of the whole meeting process. And I was telling Gretchen, I'm delighted to be here to share this kind of information because it really is critical to people who serve in a public body. And I was telling her that over the last 6 months or so, I have been appointed to several state organizations, and as part of the Governor's Workforce Council, I just had to, a week ago, take the same kind of training online that we're sharing with you, the same kind of information. So whether you're working on a state board or committee or council or a city or a town, the kinds of processes that we'll talk about today are very important to make sure that the public is well informed and that the process that you go through is important. So we're passionate about it. I'm delighted to be able to share it and have much more good news to share with you when it's my turn to get up here. So Gretchen, I will turn it back to you.
So the purpose of this program is basically to give you all a review of all the procedures and protocols and laws that really uphold your service as public officials in Queen Creek. And I want to take this opportunity as someone who has served in the public venue for many years. Thank you for your service. Not only are you doing a wonderful service for the town of Queen Creek, but for Arizona in helping by going through programs like this, it's continuous improvement. We all need to review, even if it sounds like a review, and most of the information that you're going to be getting will be a review to you. But continuous improvement means that organizations that are public provide training like this for their advisory committees and for their staff, just to make sure that those laws and those protocols are foremost in their minds, because it is important, and you're helping create transparency in government, and that's a wonderful thing. So thank you for your service. I want to take this opportunity to also thank 2 people, Debbie Gomez and Tracy Corman, for their work in coordinating these programs. We're going to be offering 2 programs this morning and this evening for the advisory board members, and then a more technical type of training for the staff on Thursday. Both of these are going to be taped, so that's very proactive for the town of Queen Creek. I don't see many towns do that. It's extremely beneficial, not only for people who can't make it to the training, that maybe work full-time and it's just inconvenient to go to a training because we're all busy, but for new members that come on board. There'll be training provided, and it's kind of like on-demand training. They can get on the webpage and watch it. So congratulations to Queen Creek, and thank you both Debbie and Tracy. We could not have put this together without the staff, and you've done a fantastic job. Thank you so much. Before we get started, I want to just go through the logistics of this morning so there's no surprises. The purpose of the program, as far as the facilitators go, Pat and I, is that our goal is to provide you with an interactive experience and materials that you can immediately use back as you serve on the advisory committees while you're serving as committee, board, or commission members. That's our goal. And you do have participants' guides, as Councilmember Oliphant said, that has all of the material that we'll be covering in that guide and a little bit more. So you should hopefully use it as a reference source. Now, our itinerary this morning, this is a 3-hour program. And I'm just going to disclose to you, there's a lot of information that we're covering in 3 hours, a lot. So we'll be clicking along. We will offer a 10-minute break midway through the program, and we are going to stay on track because we know all of you are very busy. So when we break for 10 minutes, we will start up again after 10 minutes, and the clock on the wall will go by that clock on the wall. Is that good, Pat? Okay, great. As I said, we have built this program around you. And so in order for it to be meaningful, we're going to be asking for your feedback throughout the program, which is why your tables are mic'd, okay? So we're taping this morning, so we'll be asking you some questions and asking for your feedback, and so to make this interactive requires your assistance. Now there's something called the parking lot. This is a flip chart with the parking lot, and let me explain what the parking lot is for. If, and we're going to stay on track so we can get out and you can get to your jobs by 11:30 this morning, if we have a lot of questions that we just can't get to all of them, we're going to park them on the parking lot. Equally important, if there's a question that needs more research, that Pat and I need to research further, we will park it on the parking lot, and then we will get back to you within the week. And generally what I'll do is probably everybody has gotten an email from me so far, right? And so we'll be sending those answers to you via email. Okay, so in your workbooks, I wanted to just mention that some templates and some tools have been created both for staff and for advisory committee members. These tools were created to create greater consistency across the board in all committees and boards and commissions, beginning with the clerk's template. The mayor and council and town manager is looking to create greater consistency among agendas as well as staff reports. So there's a template for staff reports so that you look uniform. So the information is more concise and it's easier to read. We have a template as well for committee reports, both the long and the short versions, as well as the preferred minute writing format. Now, as I mentioned to you, the staff is going to go through training on Thursday. This training is different from this class in that it's more technical. And Pat, as you know, if you read her bio, she is known nationally as an expert in how to write effective minutes, and she'll be really getting technical with the staff that are really charged with writing those minutes. But you will be providing an overview of those templates so you know what is expected. Additionally, effective on July 1st, and in your packets, there is a new staff administrative procedure to create greater clarity and to help the committee staff managers understand with clarity what their responsibilities are. So again, I applaud the town of Queen Creek for continually improving on their processes and procedures to make your service even easier and more clear. What I'm going to do now is briefly go over what we call learning objectives. So if Pat and I do our jobs really well, at the end of this program, all of you should be able to describe your purpose, your responsibilities, and roles with clarity, okay? And that of the staff managers as well, those people that support you. You should also be able to understand Robert's Rules of Orders. Now, Robert's Rules is the foundation of parliamentary procedure, which is the required foundation of minutes. This is what all public meetings, this is the format for all public meetings, and Robert's Rules is that foundation. And the neat thing about Robert's Rules is that it's easy to understand. I don't know if you've ever tried to go through parliamentary procedure, but I have. Oops, sorry, I won't do that. I have, and it's really kind of difficult to wade through, but as Pat will explain when she goes through Robert's Rules, it's an easy way to understand parliamentary procedure. You should be able to, at the end of this program, understand what the town wants in agendas, meetings, and reports in the way of being consistent, concise, and uniform, as well as explaining the open meeting law. Basically, why is open meeting law important to help you as advisory members? You should be able to understand what constitutes conflict of interest, as well as what constitutes entertainment and gifts, okay? So we have a lot to go over this morning. But before we do, I'd like to briefly go around the room to our participants, and I want to ask you to introduce yourself, the advisory committee or committees that you currently serve on, and your length of service. And I would like to start with Alan.
My name's Alan Shirley. I'm currently on both the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Transportation Advisory Board. Previously, I had served on Maricopa County's Transportation Advisory Board for about 5 years, and had been president of the AIA, American Institute of Architects, in Phoenix for a couple of years. So I think I'm a little bit familiar with Mr. Robert. And
Great.
but we moved to Gilbert about a year and a half ago. I mean, to Queen Creek about a year and a half ago from Gilbert, and found that it's a nice place to be. So if I can do something that improves the quality of life here, that's what I want to be doing.
That's great. Thank you so much. Marcus?
Gretchen, and we're getting signals that they really should talk into the microphone.
I'm sorry.
Yes, if you could. Thank you. Let's just... There you go.
Good morning, Marquis Scott, President of the Queen Creek Chamber of Commerce. I am on the Town Center Committee and the Economic Development Committee. I've been the president of the Queen Creek Chamber since September of 2010.
Thank you. Lee?
Good morning. My name is Lee Esther. I'm the chairperson of the Queen Creek Economic Development Commission. I've been on that commission for, I think, 4 years.
Very good.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Eric Kerr. I've started off, I've been in Queen Creek for 23 years. I was born and raised in Chandler. I've been on the Parks and Trails Committee, which was, I believe, since its inception 12 years ago, I think. And now I'm on the PRAC. They combined several committees together, and I'm on PRAC. So I've been on that committee, I think they combined them 2 years ago.
Thank you so much. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just start this ball rolling in this conversation with a short review of your purpose and structure. Your role, if there was one word, and I'm going to throw this to the audience, if there was one word to describe your role, what would it be in service to the Queen Creek Town Council?
I would say participative.
Okay. Anything else? I heard from over there, we didn't pick it up, but advisory, yes. You advise the mayor and council. And so one of the things that you can help new advisory members, because all of you have a lot of experience, is to help them understand that as advisors, you may or may not, the council may or may not adopt your recommendations, and they shouldn't feel bad about that, because that really is your role, is to advise. And you do this through bringing individually your experience to the advisory committee, as well as being one body and working as one body to research recommendations for the council through studying specific issues. And in this role, because you act as one advisory body, it is very, very important that you act what? There's one word I'm looking for. You remain objective. Absolutely. We must remain objective. Your responsibility, being objective and being a member that is advocating and really representing all the residents of Queen Creek, you must keep your agendas non-personal. And you must act lawfully within the spirit of the law. And quite frankly, this is why many towns and cities right now are going through, they're taking the time to take people through this type of training simply because it's very important that people understand the law.
And those of you who are following along with Gretchen, she's on page 6.
Thank
Page
you.
6.
You need to place the public welfare ahead of who?
Your own.
Your own, absolutely. Now, given all these responsibilities, I'm going to ask Pat to come up and help me. What I'd like to do, and this is beautiful, we have an even number of folks here. So I would like for you to take the next couple of minutes, turn to a partner, and I want you to openly and honestly discuss those things that you really like about your service as an advisory committee member, as well as those things that are maybe still confusing or frustrating about your service. And we'll take a couple of minutes to allow you to discuss.
Probably trying to gain some public perspective before the meeting so that you can literally represent the interest of the people that you're there to represent.
And then how it gets lost or what the connection changes are. Yeah.
It's just the political process.
Because you can input one thing that's just like
be a voice of many with your group.
you know, you say a word and by the time it gets back around, it gets changed. So that's.
I think we're going to give you each your own microphone, since we have plenty.
I guess the thrill for me is I've actually never been on a chamber of, never been on a commission before, so it was all new to me. I moved out to Queen Creek 10
Being
years
able
ago
to
just
be
'cause I kinda
involved in
liked the
developing
aura of the community.
policies
So
and
I got involved.
procedures that will improve the quality
I
of
was
life in
actually
the
able to
town.
get involved through SRP, the company I work for, as
Okay.
a representative on the commission. So, and I played
on
it
the
safe
front
for the
end of
first
the
little
plan and
while, and
stuff like
I've
that.
chaired it now for the last
So even
3 or 4
initiating
years.
one,
So that's
if you see something that could be done
yeah, that's kind
differently,
of it's a little bit
bring it
different
up
to
and
chair the
discuss it
meeting than
and
it
see
is
what
just to
kind
be
of
a participant. You
support
kind
you
of
get.
manage the meeting, so it's kind of been kind of thrilling, kind of chilling at the same time. So that's it.
Okay, so we would like for you to just briefly report out. So select among the 4 of you who's going to report out for your small groups. And let's start with the thrills, what thrills you about your service, and then go into what's a little bit chilling about your service. So let's start over here.
Did you want me to speak for Lee? Or?
If you decide, yes,
No,
whoever would like to
Yours was
speak.
fine.
Probably the thrills is those being on a committee and being able to come to a consensus on a subject and then see it go through the process and come to fruition. You know, you can see the outcome, what is the final product. The chills about the service is sometimes you don't understand how it goes through the process, whether or not it goes through the process through town staff, then through, the council, through planning and zoning, and sometimes what you think you've said or what you think you've planned and the outcome is different. So that's a little bit of, how it changes and it kind of, I don't know, it just changes. It
Kind of
just-
morphs
Yeah, morphs,
from
yeah,
your
that's the
original
word for it. It just kind of
recommendation.
morphs into something that it wasn't exactly what you had planned or what you had foreseen, as the group, so
Okay,
that's it.
thank you. Next group.
Want me to do it? What we came up with regards to the thrills was just being involved from a public perspective, being able to gain perspective from the public and bring that to the table. The political process as a whole is exciting. Being one person in the room, but being the voice of many in the community. being involved in the policymaking process, being on the front end of the ideas, or maybe initiating some of the ideas that will sometime possibly become policy for the town. And then we didn't really get to chills. So, Alan, you want to share any of your chills?
I guess I have a personal concern a little bit because I've lived in the East Valley all my life. And I know a lot of people and a lot of families that are both old-timers as well as newcomers. And I have a little bit of concern about people coming to you wanting political favors in your board or commission. It occurred for me this past month and with a company that I had done a lot of work with in the past. And they said, we have a case coming before your commission and we appreciate your support. So dealing with those kind of things are sometimes a little bit of a concern.
It can be really concerning because you want to do what's good for the organization, and you will have, because of your high visibility positions, you will have that. So thank you for that, Alan. And thank you, Pat. So hopefully we'll be able to answer your chills as well as reinforce your thrills in this program. Do all of you know that the council very recently, as a matter of fact, it was in April, that the council made some revisions in the standard bylaws for advisory committees? Does everybody know that? Did you have a chance to read those? Good, because we're going to review those real quickly. So the purpose of the committees are to establish bylaws for citizen advisory committees to maximize public involvement in the policy-making process. That's that transparency. Now, who are these bylaws applicable to? Who must adhere to these bylaws?
Those that are on the committees?
All town committees, correct. All committee members serve at the pleasure of the town council. Can anybody tell me what that means? When we say we serve at the pleasure of the town council.
That the town council ultimately has the say-so on who has a position and doesn't have a position on those committees. And so it is their selection process that allows us the honor to be involved. That's
absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And working at the pleasure, whether it's working at the pleasure, when I worked at the Supreme Court, I worked at the pleasure of the court. And what that means is that the court, through a majority vote, could remove me without cause. And that's just a part of public government. How many members of the town council can currently serve as liaison members in advisory meetings?
One per committee, I think.
Two.
Is it two?
And what are the minimum and maximum numbers of committee members? Does everybody know? Minimum is 7, maximum is 11. Okay, so we stagger the terms, correct? And the reason why we stagger terms is so you're not appointed or reappointed at the same time. And when a committee is established, and say there's 11, 6 members have a 1-year term and 5 members have 2-year terms. But what happens, what happens if membership is less than 11 at the time of appointment? What do? And this has happened before. So you have a committee that's less than 11. What happens is the members are divided evenly between 1 and 2 terms. So you still have that staggered service. So everybody's not leaving and entering at the same time. So what happens, and sometimes this happens, when an advisory member has to resign? It's in the middle of the term. What happens? Do you just get along without that member?
The person, a temporary person is appointed?
Yes. The mayor and council appoint a new member to serve the remainder of that particular term. Now, you select your chair and vice chairs. However, the town council makes it official through ratification. and that's every single committee. How many committees may each person serve on at one time now? Today.
I think.
Well, according to the new bylaws, this is something new, one committee at a time. So, for example, Alan, you serve on multiple committees. So when your next term of office is up, then you need to make a decision on which committee you want to retain and resign from the others, okay? So one committee at a time. Is it okay for committee members to express personal opinions? Is that okay? I see some shaking of heads. Absolutely, it's okay. But a good rule of thumb for all cities and towns when you serve on an advisory committee is that when you have, say, a divergent vote or you disagree with the recommendation, it's okay to voice those recommendations or voice your opinion, but you just have to qualify that by saying, this is my opinion and it doesn't reflect that of the advisory committee or the town council. Okay? Who's qualified to join town committees?
Anybody, town residents?
Anybody.
Yeah.
And do you have to be a resident?
I believe that in our committees, the way it was structured is that the majority were town residents, but they did allow, I want to say, 1 or 2 positions outside of the town residents to be on that committee.
Perfect. Yes, Eric, you're right. There's up to 2 non-residents that can serve on an advisory committee. Now, what if someone that is hired by and works for the town, can they serve on a committee?
Not anymore.
No. What must be completed in order, now think back, what did you have to complete in order to officially apply for an advisory committee? Do you remember? It's something called a notice of interest form. Do you remember that? And you had to list those advisory committees in order of preference that you would like to serve. Where do you submit that to? The town clerk. And the town clerk keeps those on file for 12 months. Now, if you have not been selected for an advisory committee at the end of 12 months, what you're going to have to do is reapply. You're going to have to fill out the notice of interest form again and resubmit it. Okay, I believe that's something new as well. Are there attendance requirements? So you get selected. You all got selected. Is there an attendance requirement?
At this time, I believe there is. Prior, there was not.
Okay, so yes, there is.
Yes.
Absolutely, there is. Oops, what happened?
Try the 6 o'clock button.
Oh, there we go. Yes, there is. And the attendance requirement is this. If you miss 25% or more of your regularly scheduled meetings in a 12-month period, the town council may choose through majority vote to remove that member. Okay, so
And Gretchen, let me add on that. I think that probably comes from either standards much higher, that might even, probably even in open meeting law somewhere, there's something that states that. But I know for state level, same thing. You miss 25%, you will be asked to leave the commission or council, and they will refill your position. Mm-hmm.
Question, ma'am?
Yes.
Is there a minimum amount of meetings per year that's required in
That's
order
a
for
good
that?
question.
A
law to
minimum
be-
number?
Yeah.
I don't know. No, that's set by each individual. Normally, they're quarterly. All the things, all the state boards that I'm on are all quarterly.
And sometimes
but
monthly.
But you know, it depends. The towns and cities, they tend to have monthly. So that's pretty much left, I think, to the discretion of the public body that is setting up their own bylaws. So Queen Creek would determine what they wanted their schedule to be. And has it always been the same, Tracy? And when you think back in history, was there ever a point where it changed?
I'm sorry, I had to step and answer a question for somebody. So the question was how?
What's the minimum time?
What's the minimum meetings required for a committee per year?
I don't know that there is a minimum. I think
I didn't believe that there
on
was.
the business of the committee. So some committees may need to meet more often, some may meet quarterly. It just depends.
Now, sometimes there are no notice of interest forms on file, and when this occurs, then the vacancies are posted and advertised in public buildings. And the recruitment process includes that all the forms are reviewed for accuracy and completeness. Interviews then are conducted, and generally those interviews are conducted by the mayor. Were all of you interviewed by the mayor for your positions? Sometimes the mayor is unable to interview all candidates. So that falls to generally a department director or a committee staff manager. But all of you should have been interviewed. And then when you're selected, you go through an orientation. All of you went through some form of an orientation? Yes? Okay. Oh, okay. Who's responsible for coordinating all of this process?
Town clerk?
Nope.
Department
It's
heads.
the committee man, certainly under the clerk certainly has a great hand in that, in assisting with the protocol, but basically that falls to the committee managers, and the committee managers, because this is such a important position in addition to their regular responsibilities as a staff member, being a committee manager is extremely important because they're the liaisons between the advisory committees and management. And so the town manager appoints these individuals. And their mission is to generally establish and maintain positive relationships between all of the advisory board members and management. And this has everything to do with communication, both written communication and verbal communication, and quite frankly, nonverbal communication is very important for these folks as well, to create and maintain those positive working relationships. And we're going to be covering that in the staff training on Thursday. Some of the specific responsibilities that these folks have are obviously taking minutes and distributing those minutes to the town clerk. What all of the committee managers need to do, not only taking minutes, but they must present and post the results or the draft minutes within 10 days on where? Where do they have to post those?
Website, town website?
The website, the town website. And then they have to ensure that those minutes are approved. And once those minutes are approved, they have how many days to post the approved minutes on the website? 2 days, right, 48 hours. In addition to that, the committee managers need to submit the handwritten minutes or the completed minutes in a hard copy format with all original signatures to the clerk's office. Distributing information, your logistical support, where are you going to conduct your meetings, when, all this falls under the responsibility of the staff managers, and they basically are there to provide guidance to you. So we're going to now go into the more technical aspects of your responsibilities, and I'll turn this section over to Pat, and she'll be covering Robert's Rules.
Thank you. Do you have any questions for Gretchen before she goes off to the side there? Any other thoughts you want to clarify from some of the policies and procedures that we've already been talking about? Okay, thank you. Well, let me ask you, we'll come back to this in a minute. Let me ask you a general question. You've all been in many, many meetings in your working career, in your lifetime. And if I ask you to say, what are the meetings that you literally wanted to escape from? You wanted to flee out the door. It was so bad. What would you tell me?
Which meetings?
Yeah, meetings. I'm not talking about town meetings or advisory. No. Think back in your career where you went to something that was just a very poorly run meeting. What did you not like about that?
No organization.
No organization. Very good. What else?
No answers.
No answers?
No answers.
Okay, so topics would come up, but they weren't resolved.
That's correct.
You did not get resolution to things. There were no answers. Very good. What else?
No focused communication, everybody talking at once.
Oh, everybody talks. Yeah, in fact, it gets chaotic. The worst meetings that people have mentioned to me are ones where they broke into arguments. I mean, literally, verbally criticizing one another and some kind of verbal abuse. So clearly, I mean, these are the kinds of things I hear all the time. Lack of organization, lack of focus, drags on too long, things come up that aren't even relevant. The meeting doesn't have a sense of forward movement and accomplishment. In fact, there was something where you said you liked being, part of a process that's clear, because if a process is not clear, that is something you don't care for. So that's why this whole Robert's Rules is an important topic to talk about, because basically, Henry Martin Robert always thought that if you got a bunch of people together, it was pretty much going to descend into chaos. And so he worked 30 years on this pocket rules of order, this compendium that he created, which today is really important to all public bodies. So if you'll make sure you have joined me on page 9, that's where we will start talking about this topic. And I might have wondered, why on earth did I put up a picture of a headstone? Well, you have the picture of Henry in your book there, so you can see him. But he looks like quite a stiff guy, doesn't he? Kind of a serious, stiff guy. And when you think he spent 30 years of his life working on parliamentary procedure, you think this guy must be a stick in the mud. I would like you to notice, yes, you're noticing it, Lee. You're reading the headstone there, and you're saying, Isabel Hoagland Robert, 25 years younger than Mr. Henry Martin Robert. So, he must have not been such a stick in the mud after all. He must have been quite the guy. But I have listed in your book there just some of the highlights of his background, and I don't, bring this up to kind of bore you with his biography, but I want you to recognize the supremely incredible public servant that this man was. I mean, when you look, of course, West Point, starts with that, but look at the kinds of things that he did. He was an engineer that worked on Puget Sound in the Civil War. He was working on defenses in Washington and Philadelphia. He was the engineer of the Division of the Pacific. He improved the rivers and the ports in Oregon, Washington, Green Bay, northern Wisconsin, Michigan, Oswego, Philadelphia, Long Island Sound. I mean, this guy was all over the country working on these important public projects. And I mean, when you're talking about things like fortifications and bridges and ports, I mean, these are really, really critical. So he was actually president of the Board of Engineers until 1901. So just to finish up a quick highlight of him, the other thing I find very interesting about him is if you read at the end of the list there, he was made Brigadier General on April 30th, 1901, appointed Chief of Engineers, and served until May 2nd, 1901, when he retired from the Army. Now, when I first read that, I thought those were very odd dates. Does that strike any of you as a little strange? Does it look like he served for 3 days before he retired? Well, that is the truth, and I suspect that what they did is because they made him the Chief of Engineers and the Brigadier General in recognition of this incredibly thorough public service that he had done for a lifetime. And then when he wanted to retire, that may have affected, I don't know if they had retirement benefits back then, but whatever it would have been his legacy, his history, the footnote. I mean, here we are, all these years later, over 100 years later, we're talking about this man's history and his legacy. So he got the political recognition by being made the official Chief of Engineers and a Brigadier General. So I think that was important to him. I think it was a reward for his lifetime of service. So a little trivia, and Gretchen, I don't even know if you know this one, but there's a gentleman here who passed away now about 9 years ago. He was a local man named Cavett Robert, and Cavett was the first president of the National Speakers Association, the NSA, which is a very well-renowned professional association of people who do this kind of work, who do speaking, but basically even ones that speak in front of large public bodies, audiences of 500, 1,000, many thousand. And he started that professional association. That was his first president, and he is a descendant of Henry Martin Robert. So Cavett Robert, if you ever hear that name, because he's a local person, so he's fairly well known in this area. And he can trace this man back to his lineage. So enough about Henry. Let's talk about what Henry did. So Henry spent the 30 years creating this thing that he called Robert's Rules of Order, the Pocket Compendium, and he said, you're going to have chaos if you don't have some kind of rules of order. And parliamentary procedure, as Gretchen said, is pretty complicated. Although it's interesting, if you ever watch some of the things where they get up and they stand up and start doing battle, screaming at each other, it can be somewhat entertaining, but I don't think a lot of business is getting accomplished. So Henry Roberts said, we want order, we want efficiency, we want this to be fast and efficient. So on the top of page 10, if you're capturing notes with me, this whole set of guidelines that we refer to as Roberts Rules is going to allow us to conduct the meeting how?
Orderly,
Quickly and
expeditious.
and quickly and efficiently and fast, kind of the same thing. But the other one that you see up here on the screen is fairly. Because as we talk more about the rules, you'll see that a critical element of Robert's Rules is that everyone has a voice. Everyone has an equal voice. And the way that the motions and the various things that you can do with motions are set up, they allow every person in that room to be involved in the process and address the process and in a way that they are all heard. So it is extremely objective, extremely fair. Much more so than if there was nothing like this happening and it was up to the desire of somebody who wanted to recognize someone. They could say, I'll recognize Alan, but I'm not going to pay any attention to Eric. If Eric's trying to signal me, I'm sorry, I don't see him. He's not even sitting there. That's not going to happen in any meeting conducted under Robert's Rules, because the moment that Eric signals he wants to be heard, the chair has to acknowledge him. And you said you were a chair, is that right? You said you had been, that you were the chair?
He's the chair.
Lee's the chair. So Lee, you know how important that is, that you have to watch for how people want to speak. So typically, I mean, do they call your name? Do they just kind of raise their hand? How is it that you notice when somebody wants to be heard in front of your group?
Some ask to be able to speak, and some are more informal. They wait their turn, and I kind of, allow the meeting to go on. If it gets out of control, I try to bring order back.
Well, good. And actually, that's the nice thing about Robert's Rules is you always have the ability to go back to a specific place, a specific point in time, a specific place in the meeting. Because if discussion gets a little out of control, all you have to say is, we have a motion on the floor. And then you have to deal with that motion. So we'll talk in a few minutes about handling all the motions. And again, Gretchen said that a lot of what we talk about may be somewhat review for you, and that's true. You see these processes happening in your meeting, so I think maybe one of the things that is important about today is you can say, oh, Pat's saying this is how we should do it. You can just sort of do a mental evaluation against the meetings you're attending and say, okay, we're doing that, oh, I'm not sure we do that. So you have some freedom. I mean, there are some bodies that are very, very strict. I'm on an Arizona Skills Standards Commission that is chaired by Carolyn Warner and Mr. Huppenthal, the Superintendent of Education. And I'm telling you, they are masters at Robert's Rules. I just watch them in awe going, wow, good for you. I mean, they even get into stuff, I don't even think about it. Let's call the previous question. And I mean, they have memories that are amazing. And boy, they just tick along in a very organized fashion. That's a group I would say is very rigidly adhering to Robert's Rules. And you may not be doing that, and that's okay. I want you to understand they're a guideline, and to the extent that you are using them, you are accomplishing the business properly and quickly and fairly. But if it's not something where you're adhering to it with great diligence, don't feel that you're somehow not doing the right thing. So let's talk about some of the things that are important regarding this. In this section where we're talking about the minutes and the Robert's Rules and the Arizona Open Meeting Law, I think some of the things that are very critical for you to know are up on the screen there. The elements of the meeting that involve the rules, what those are, and what you should be doing with them. I do want you to know the order of precedence of motions, because when multiple things start happening in a meeting, somebody wants to amend something, you do need to know in what order things have to be considered. So the minute someone brings an amendment forth, you can't just say, well, let's vote on that motion, because the amendment is there. You got to deal with the amendment. So there is a certain order of things. That's pretty important. And voting procedures. There's multiple ways You can vote. I'll be asking you about the different voting procedures that you're using, so you can think about that and be ready to tell me about it. And also something called the quorum. Very, very important. In fact, you'll hear all of us as a part of this training group, it's Tracy and Debbie and Gretchen and I, we will be saying to you things like, no quorum, no meeting. It's that simple at Queen Creek. If there isn't a quorum, you should not be having a meeting. So think back to a time when you looked at your group and said, okay, we don't have a majority here, but did you keep going? Because technically, the town attorney says at that point, you should just stop. Did you wonder why Gretchen emphasized 11 members on the committee, potentially? I mean, why not 10? Why not 12? Why is 11 something that makes a difference?
It's an odd number.
It's an odd number. You really want an odd number.
Right. It perpetuates a majority vote.
Yeah. For voting, if anytime you have even numbers, if you have something called split votes, and there are some new processes at Queen Creek about how to handle some of those split votes, or at least a new emphasis on it. We'll talk about that later. But if you have split votes, you could split in half, and then you're not going to have an outcome. Yes.
On the different organizations that I've been part of, not Queen Creek, but other organizations, the chair doesn't vote unless there's a tie. So
Correct.
They've been able to have even number of members because the chair is never voting unless there's a tie amongst the people that are in the room.
That is correct, and that's I see that pretty much every place where Robert's rules are in place, that the chair is a tie-breaking vote. Yes. Any other quick comment or thought? Let me get your name. Is it Marcus?
Marquise.
Marquise. Thank you. So those are the elements that we'll be talking about here, and the decision-making is always by majority. So that's, if you have some little fill-ins there, you'll see those on page 10. Make sure you put in the decision-making is by majority vote. Now, if you say to me, Pat, is that true 100% of the time? What do you think I'm going to say?
Yes.
Good try, Marcus, but actually I'm going to say no on that. Normally, majority vote is the standard, absolutely. But groups have the ability, with certain issues that they have under consideration, to decide that they want a different voting amount. It's not that common, it's a little more rare, but it has been known to happen where for a particular issue, they've decided that they want 2/3. So 2/3 is the most common non-majority number, but also 3/4. You know, 3/4 is, according to Robert's rules, they could be 2/3 or 3/4. But what has to happen is the group has to vote. That will be, they vote with their, that's interesting, they vote with their majority vote that they want to change the rules to 2/3. So I just realized, yeah, they're voting with the majority to decide that. But it's usually because it's an issue that warrants, maybe there's been some very strong political feeling about it or something, or maybe some uncertainty even in the group senses that, you know, the simple majority is not going to do it for us. So that group can say, you know, on this issue, we want a 2/3. And so then they vote for that, and if the vote passes for that issue only, it's going to be a 2/3 vote.
Question, ma'am, would that decision be made prior to the vote?
Prior to the vote, you bet. Oh, yeah.
Can you go back if you're unable to make that decision?
Oh, okay, well, so let's think about it. Remember we talked about how important it is to take things in order. So there is a situation on tie votes where there was a tie vote on something. You can bring it up for reconsideration, but you don't have to. But let's say the group chooses to do that. So there was a tie vote. The group is saying, and normally a tie vote is a no vote. But somebody could technically make a motion that says, we would like to reconsider that. We would like to have a 2/3 majority vote for that. I don't know exactly why they would do that, but if they did, let's say they did, then they would vote to have a 2/3 for that vote, and they would vote again. Now, if it lost on the tie, I'm thinking maybe it wouldn't pass on a 2/3 either. So it's a way to really close the door on that one.
Well, sometimes people are voting and it's just an automatic majority. If they're one of those people that's on the fence, they'll vote no for safety. But then when you open it up to 2/3, they're like, well, I can go ahead and vote yes now because everybody else isn't going to change their vote either. And a lot of times, you'll see the numbers become different.
That's a good way to think about it. I think that's a very realistic possibility. So that might be one of the reasons why you would actually perform that. I think it would be kind of rare to ever see that sort of thing happen, but according to the rules, it could happen. Yeah, so I like that, Marcus, because I think that's probably what they would be trying to do. They would be trying to maybe open up a broader field of what people would consider. Yeah, okay. So majority normally, every member has equal, make sure you fill in equal rights. Yeah, it's just in a meeting governed with Robert's rules, there's no one who can influence or in any way sway what is going on there. And if they could try to do it behind the scenes, but Gretchen's going to be talking about that. That's like a big no-no. But in the meeting itself, there is no way that people can push a personal agenda the way the voting processes are set up. That because it protects the minority. The minority rights, therefore, are safe. Now, even though Robert's Rules is a pretty hefty book, in fact, I brought for show and tell here, I have something that is my Cliff's Notes, Robert's Rules. And I would like you to notice that even the Cliff Notes of Robert's Rules is that many pages of fine print. And my actual book is about 270 pages of all of these nitpicky details. This is a handy-dandy little thing, though.
Where'd you get that?
Well, I got it at Borders now. Borders is gone, but I'll bet Barnes & Noble would have it. They have published by, let's see, what is that group that does this? It is called, I don't even see that on here. It's a Quick Study, bar charts, Quick Study Academic. So they have like these 4-page, 8.5 by 11 laminated things for everything under the sun. If you've never gone and checked that out at Barnes & Noble's, you should just go to say, where are those laminated charts? So they just call them Quick Study. And they have it for everything. So this is like today's version of Cliff Notes. Do y'all remember Cliff Notes? Young kids don't get that. You know, the younger generation, when you say Cliff Notes, they're like, what? But any of us in the age groups here, we all understand Cliff Notes. It's a nice little, simple, kind of a cheat sheet, if you will. I think people are used to that because of their computer stuff, you know, for their Word and their PowerPoint. They have all these little cheat sheets. They like those. Any quick question? Okay, next one is you have to follow, you want simple procedures. So I'm teasing about the book is 273 pages, but whatever, you know, it's technically the procedures really do make sense. And there is a very important order of motions that we will talk about. Only one question at a time. Now, you know that, right? I mean, you see that. You're not considering multiple agenda items. You have an agenda item that comes up, you resolve it, and then you move on. You don't say, well, let's talk about this other thing over here while we're talking about this. You can't do that. The agenda doesn't really allow you to do that, and the whole process of discussion under Robert's Rules really does not allow that either. And the officers are impartial, which is why, as you said, Marquise, the chair should stay impartial and be a tie-breaking vote rather than be a... I have actually seen some groups that let the chair vote, but that's because the group decided they wanted that way. It's not kind of the norm. So you'll see the Arizona open meeting law is something that governs all of this. And Gretchen talked about the agenda, so you have to have the agenda. There's the citation from the Arizona statutes, and we will be talking a little bit more about open meeting law and some of the other, kind of like the nitty-gritties of that in a few minutes. But first, let me ask you to consider a scenario. So here is, bottom of page 10, something I want you to think about. So the commission meeting is opening, and the agenda is being reviewed. And so Susanna addresses the chair and says, we may need to revise the wording when we're discussing that third agenda item, since what is showing here is not the complete issue. So that partner you were talking with earlier, pair off for like a quick 30 seconds here and answer the question, can the commission revise or add agenda, or add to that agenda? Can they revise or add items to the agenda, and why or why not? So Marquise and Allen, bottom of page 10, if Susanna says, I want to change the wording on this agenda item, it's not accurate, can they, at that meeting, just change that agenda item?
No,
So-
because of the public meeting law, it has to be advertised in advance.
Did you agree?
I was going to say something different, but I guess he.
Oh, well, what were you going to say? No, say that to Marquis then and see what his answer is.
It says right here that the agenda is being reviewed at this point, and then, again, I'm just going from my experience outside of town meetings, is that the agenda review process, the purpose of it is to see if there's anything missing from the agenda or inaccurate to then be addressed before going in.
Oh, it could be. So you're thinking of this as prior to publication of the agenda for that meeting? So you're thinking of
I'm talking
agenda
about
review?
It's in the meeting, but
This is in the meeting, though. They're
in the
meeting.
meetings that I'm in, there's a process, it's the opening of the meeting.
Right, right,
And the next step is agenda review.
right.
And the purpose of that is to correct anything or add anything to the agenda that the body would agree upon before continuing in the agenda.
Open meeting law is not going to let that happen, though. See, that's the scary
Well, that's
thing.
why I said, once he said what he said, I said, okay.
Yeah, and the minute, see, you had a smart partner there because Alan said, nope, and Alan, you're right. Did you have that same thing, Eric and Lee, that once the agenda has been published, when you come together as that advisory committee or board, you cannot be putting anything else on there. That's not allowed because it wasn't published. What if somebody, so Marquis, let me put it this way. What if you're doing that, you're kind of going through the agenda saying these are the 6 items that we will be covering at the meeting tonight, and somebody says, oh, that number 5, oh, you're missing a piece here. We also need to talk about thus along with that. What if there's somebody who wanted to comment on that or have something to say about that? They would not know because it was not in the published agenda and they are not there. So technically then that voice was left out. So your answer to this is exactly what we heard Alan say. Question, yes.
Ma'am.
Eric.
In that respect, that if we all agree that because it has not been published, that will not be reviewed or that will not be on the agenda, could you move that, or could the person that wanted to comment on that particular item, being that it wasn't going to be discussed at the meeting, would you move that to an open comment prior to the meeting? Or could you?
No, couldn't move it to open comment because again, it wasn't published.
Okay,
and the
right,
person,
but no, public comment. I'm saying public comment.
at
prior-
that same meeting?
Yes, ma'am.
My answer is no. Agree? Not at that same meeting. Not to say that the person who put that agenda item on there, who has a big concern about that agenda
Correct.
item, when you get to that, can say, I move that we table this agenda item for a future meeting. Then you go back, you figure out exactly how you want that agenda item
Okay.
to be phrased. You bring it back to another meeting where it has been published.
Okay.
Correct?
I didn't know whether somebody could comment on it.
Not, they can't comment either. They can't, you can't talk about it, you can't vote on it, that you can't, if it's not the agenda item you want, basically it's dead. I mean,
Dead,
that's,
okay.
that's what I think of it as a dead item. You need to just say, we're gonna, you can withdraw it. I mean, there are people who can say, I withdraw, I make a move to withdraw this agenda item from our meeting tonight. We will put it on a future agenda. That's fine, because you'll be publishing
Okay.
it, and then you'll be safe. Yes, Tracy?
Pat, maybe what Eric is referring to is if you have a member of the public during public comment period bring something up, maybe you can maybe talk about how the committee might or could respond or not respond in that.
Oh, that's a good point. So somebody in the public comment is bringing up something related to an agenda item that is, well, that they can do though, Eric, that a public.
That's where I was
the
going, whether or not.
Yeah, let's say we've got, 20 people sitting back there and somebody says, I'd like, I mean, they can ask for public comment. Well, you don't know what they're going to say until they stand up and say it. But the chair then would probably need to say, the committee cannot, we appreciate, thank you for your comment. We cannot consider it at this time related to this particular item. We can put this on a future agenda and discuss that thing. Or just say, they can say, thank you for your input, but we are not allowed to have that be part of this discussion. So, and Freda was going to be here, but is not here, right? So we were going to actually have, Freda was supposed to come, well, we thought she might come and even offer some interesting insights to some of those those are touchy issues. Those are sensitive issues for you, and I know you always want to do the right thing legally, so. But I would say the safest thing is, for sure on the group, do not allow any discussion of anything different than is on that agenda. If you actually are bringing it up and discussing it and a member of the public brings up as open comment something where they say, but I really want the committee to do thus and such related to that, you can thank them and say, we will make note of this. And in fact, public comments are in the minutes. So it would be in the, you could say this will be reflected in the minutes. If there's a need to take action related to that, we will have it on a future agenda, and you will see that posted. Please come to that
Yeah,
meeting.
I didn't know
Do it.
in what order the
Yeah.
committee would go kill the item or not have it and then allow public comment, even though there were people there to speak on that. It would just reflect on the minutes and it would be no discussion and
Right.
it would be dead.
Yeah, well, in fact, if you got to the item and you decided to withdraw a table or put it on a future agenda, at that point, if somebody said they wanted to, the chair would have to say, I cannot allow you to comment at this time. So, somebody might say, oh, I came to this meeting specifically to talk about the such and such, and now you guys aren't going to discuss that tonight. And the chair would say, we will discuss having that on a future agenda. Please watch for the notifications. Please attend at that time. We are very interested in your comments. I mean, you don't try to shut them down or in any way, seem like you don't want to listen, but they just need, well, see, the public doesn't know the process. Do you realize when you're doing this whole Robert's Rules procedural thing, you're actually teaching the public how you discuss these items, and they will learn over time as they watch you do certain things, as they hear certain things that you say about how you're voting or how you're considering things or whatever. They will learn. So you are really interesting teachers of the public in that regard, because I can guarantee most of the public has no clue about Robert's Rules. And so the chair might actually have to say, open meeting law does not allow us to consider this issue tonight, because we are changing it from what the agenda item is. We will be tabling it for a future issue. We do welcome your comments, because I don't think you can probably even let them comment. I mean, if that agenda item is taken off and you're going to do it in the future, then it's not up for discussion even at that meeting. You'll have to tell the person who wants to comment to do it in the future.
On public comment, there's always a stipulation that says, and the chair usually reads that, and it's pretty much, it says something, members of the committee can address the council or the committee on any item that's not listed on the agenda, and then it goes on to say something about it won't be acted on or something like that. So any public comment can come forward. You just need to make sure you don't discuss it, vote on it, anything, and then agendize it on the next round.
Right.
And then back to if it's already an agenda, you remove it, then there's no discussion.
That interesting that you bring that up, because I think that is a good way to approach that, because if a committee member would respond back to the member of the public, or someone else would comment on what that person said, now it has become discussion. And so the commission, the committee, the council, they have to make sure they don't comment on that, right, or have any clarification.
And that's happened in our committee, it's happened it hasn't happened often, but it has happened, and where the chair will catch it immediately and stop the comment and say, I'm sorry, we cannot comment then, it's not an agenda item.
Good.
Or staff will say, we'll help the chair out and say, that's not an agenda, it's public comment, we're not allowed to discuss. And you might get one comment, but we don't let that continue.
I'm glad that the staff sees as their responsibility to jump in and support the chair, because the staff person, if the chair doesn't realize that, or is just not at that moment realizing we really should be cutting this off, staff member literally can jump in, Mr. Chairman, please remember.
Staff should be watching out for that.
They should.
That is our role.
Yeah.
One of our main roles.
Yeah. Staff does watch out for that kind of stuff, because they're very sensitive to this whole, legal aspect. Okay, so good answer on that one. That was not in the published agenda. You absolutely can't talk about it. Let's go over to page 11. Let's talk about the normal order of business. Oh, and I did want to make one comment on an agenda. You do want, and your staff members are really good about this for you, trying to put in a specific detailed item that you will be talking about, because you can't just say, oh, you can't publish an agenda that says new business. If people, you can consider something, you can say our new business will be this item, and this item. So new business can certainly be a category that has specific items listed, but new business can't ever be an agenda item that has no clarification, not in open meeting law, because people would have no clue what that new business was. There would be no indication. So if you do want a category of new business, that's fine, but you just have to say what those items are. New business, old business, and the good of the order, that's just something that's related to how the committee acts among itself. So that the good of the order is like how we are comfortable doing our business together. It might be when you're sitting there at a meeting talking about, do you want to have a meeting at a certain time because of a holiday or whatever? Do you want to adjust it to a different day? I mean, it's the sort of things about how you govern yourself and manage yourself. So not something I think most of you worry about. So we know we cannot add items because open meeting law doesn't allow it, and Robert's Rules doesn't have a way to let you do it. It's not something you're allowed to do under the rules. Okay, order of business. This is on page 11, the normal order of business. There's always the call to order, capturing the attendance, making sure that you do have your quorum, and then reading the general order for all of the content is the minutes of the previous meeting first, which are voted on and approved, because they then have to be submitted to the clerk. And then you get all the reports. So after minutes, you'll get reports of standing committees, reports of special committees. If you have something that was tabled from a previous meeting, so let's go back to this thing we talked about a minute ago, you know, the agenda item that they wanted to revise. You went back afterwards and realized we really do need to talk about that. We do need to reword it. It needs to be a clearer item. You put it on the new agenda, published, everything's good to go. Well, any item that has been previously discussed usually goes before new items. So if you had tabled that, you put it top of the agenda after any of the reports. And then the new business is the category of all the specific items that you have not dealt with before. They are the last things that you take under consideration. Any question on that one, on the order of the business? So call to order, minutes, reports, previous business, any new agenda item, first time consideration by this group. That's your order. Any question on those? All right, well, let's talk about the quorum then. So it's going to be the majority. We got into that a little bit a few minutes ago. Normally it's going to be your majority. The quorum is simply the number of people that are there to take official votes. And I guess it can happen if a group doesn't realize that there isn't a quorum and is going through the agenda and suddenly votes on something, well, that vote will be null. That's a null and void vote. It can't be official because there wasn't the proper number of people to vote on that. And I think that's why the advice from our town attorney is no quorum, no meeting. You really should stop. And I think the staff members will be on top of that, and they would even say to you, you know, Madam Chair, we do not have our quorum here. We should not conduct this meeting tonight. I don't think there's any special verbiage they have to use, but it's just a sort of, I want you to be aware that somebody, your staff manager, is tracking that for you, or you yourself are, if you're a chair, are counting noses, making sure you've got enough people there to have a vote be valid, and then go ahead and conduct it. I mean, it makes sense. This is the type of element in something like the parliamentary procedure and Robert's Rules that keeps a smaller group of people from like pushing something through when a lot of people aren't there, and maybe they would have voted against that. So it's the protection of the minority. You know, we talked about why that's an element of the rules. So normally in Roberts, and I think this is true here for Queen Creek as well, you have to have the chair, the clerk, the staff member taking minutes there. In Queen Creek, actually, if a chair is unavailable, the meeting can still take place. But that's something that varies from place to place. There are some bodies, if the chair is not there, they simply do not have that meeting, they reschedule. But Queen Creek does allow that. And if somebody leaves, says, you know, sorry, I've got to go now, and all of a sudden you look around and go, oops, we don't have our quorum anymore, you actually cannot vote after that. And technically should stop the meeting and say, we'll reconsider the rest of these items on a future agenda. So any quick question on your quorum?
Question, has Robert's Rules been amended to allow a quorum to be achieved by a phone call?
As far as I know, quorums are not, phone call is...
Or being attached, being on a speaker, or...
Well, okay, that's an interesting question, because I do know state level there are people who call in, but they're not visible. When they're doing voice vote, you can't tell who's voting on on the phone.
Would
You
they
know
be
what the
part of
legality is on the
and
quorum
would they
in
be
the
part of the
room?
vote?
Yeah, they wouldn't, they would have to be recorded somehow.
I believe that we have used phones.
Correct.
And usually after the vote, then the chair or whoever's running the meeting will ask the person on the phone for their vote.
Right, they'd have to or they wouldn't know what it was, because if it's one of those voice votes where all in favor aye, all opposed no, well, you can hear some sounds coming through the phone, but you have no idea who it is. So yes, if there is anybody who's not visibly, physically present in the room, the chair would have to be responsible to say, we have 3 members who have called in tonight, so-and-so, we need your vote recorded. And so they would have to say aye or nay, literally, so everybody could hear it, yeah.
Would they not need to have heard the discussion going into that vote?
They should have heard the discussion associated with that. If they're responsible members, I don't think they would vote on something if they didn't know what the discussion was. I think they would want, in fact, if they didn't hear the discussion, it's possible to abstain. So there's something called an abstention, which is simply saying and abstainers are usually identified by name. If somebody abstains, not only that group, but everybody else who reads those minutes and the public should know that person X did not vote on that issue. So if they didn't hear the discussion, it might be very appropriate to say, I will abstain from the vote on that. I mean, there's no problem abstaining from something. In fact, Gretchen will talk about when you have conflicts of any kind, there's actually requirements to abstain, but it's not a bad thing for the person to abstain, but I don't think they should vote Alan if they have not heard the discussion.
Is there any precedent to use some kind of technology like Skype so that they're visually part of the meeting?
I haven't seen it, but I imagine there could be. I mean, there may be places that have people Skyping in and they might be projected on a screen. I personally haven't seen that, but since it's an allowable technology, the open meeting law actually says by any means, electronic or telephonic, that's one of our new means. So I would.
What kind of technological devices can be used?
Yeah. So yeah, there's a person, especially if they had somebody with Skype, it might be fun to have them projected on the wall. So I would say the answer to that is yes.
See what's going on in the back room and wherever they are.
They better be careful where they're sitting when they, anything else? Okay, so continuing on page 11, again, the most important things that Robert's Rules is governing then is things like the motions that we'll talk about next, the kinds of voting that takes place, and abstention, which I just mentioned. I may come back to that one more time if we need to, and things like adjournments. So over on page 12, let's talk about motions, because this is one of the most interesting things about the Robert's Rules is all of these ways that the business comes to the floor, and the motions are what makes that happen. So the members always have to have the floor before they make a motion. So Lee, you were saying people signal to you or you call on them or something, but they do get the floor. I don't know if you knew this, but in Robert's Rules, the chairperson always has the highest priority as a motion maker or a mover of something. And technically anyone can make a motion, but if there's multiple people wanting to do something, the chair is actually the one who has the priority. And the chair can certainly allow someone else to make a motion in his or her place. But again, an interesting thing about the way you acknowledge people is the chair decides who will be acknowledged first. So that's you see a couple of people signaling, the chair gets to say it's you or it's you. And so there's some important, I don't want to say powers, that may not be the right word, but important actions reserved for the chair that do affect how things are brought to the floor. So the normal wording is I move that, and a specific statement has to be made. The thing that I want you to watch for in your meetings, and even if you are ever a mover on something, is that you're very clear about your verbiage, because motions must be verbatim. A cardinal sin, I don't know if you've ever seen this, is where someone says, oh, blah, 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 I think we need to do blah, 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 and talks, and someone says, so moved. No, 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 never, ever, ever allow that. Because who knows what you're voting on? I mean, there was this lengthy kind of roundabout discussion here. Who knows what the actual thing that anybody would be voting on is? So that person at the chair of the staff manager should say, please state your motion for the record, because motions have to be verbatim. It is so critical. Anybody who is there in the meeting acting on something and people who read it afterward have to know what it is that you were taking action on. And so the verbiage of that is really, really critical. Tracy, do you have any comment on that or anything that you think is really important from the standpoint of the town? Because I am so adamant on that, verbatim motions. And I don't know if you want to reemphasize that or just say, yes, yes, we hear that all the time from our attorney. Or
I completely agree with you. And I think for the staff training, that we should make sure everybody knows if they don't catch it, to please ask them to repeat that.
I have several ways I will be saying that to them, Tracy. I say things like, if it isn't clear to you when the person first spoke it, it isn't going to become clear to you later as you try to take a note on that item. You better ask. So it's very, very critical to stop and say, and it's a simple, they just say, please restate that for the minutes, or I need that restated for the minutes, or something like, it's a very simple statement. But yeah, I cannot emphasize strongly enough how important it is to make sure that the right verbiage is there. So the so moved thing, yeah, please don't let anyone get away with that. In the different types of motions that you have, they're in the middle of your page there. I'm going to put this list up, and then we're going to kind of go back and forth over the next few pages as we talk about some of these. So the main motions or the resolutions are the original main motions. Those are the things that deal with new orders of business. Now you might say to me, well, what's the difference between a resolution and a motion? Flip over here for a moment. Resolutions are things that often come as predetermined verbiage. So let's say a subcommittee went away and did some work on something, and they literally brought back a document for the committee to vote on. And you can spot these, because not always, but a lot of times you'll see things like whereas, blah, 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 whereas, blah, blah. It's kind of formal, and legal sounding. But resolutions tend to have more formal wording, but they are very specific things that are being brought to that group, to your group, to vote as a whole. In other words, you're not picking it apart, you're not at that point, saying, we want to discuss this. It's sort of like a done deal. It's something that comes to you from another body, action committee, something that is pretty much meant to be voted on as a whole. If that isn't going to happen, you'd probably send it back to the subgroup and say, you need to present this differently. We can't vote on this as a whole. But normally you adopt the whole thing. When you vote on that resolution, that's it. So that's a little different than this thing we call the original main motion, which is just something about one of the orders of business, one of the topics on the agenda. You want action on that, and so you put it forth as a motion. You move that XYZ action take place. And be sure it's clearly stated. Any question on that main motion? This is the new order of business. Well, the other thing you can do is what you see here as secondary motions, and those are subsidiary, privileged, and incidental. So I have some place for you to just take some quick notes on each of these so that these will be a little bit clearer for you, what these different types of motions are. Down at the bottom of page 12, you'll see the subsidiary motion is things like tabling. So remember we had that scenario where we had somebody that wanted to change the wording of the agenda item. That would be a perfect example of introducing an subsidiary motion to table that particular agenda item for a future meeting. If everybody voted on that, then a majority, then that would be an action, and that would be considered tabled for the future. Even that word subsidiary is kind of clear in the sense when you think of something as a subsidiary, it's like below something else. It's something else that's part of or attached to that main motion, but is not the main motion. So tabling, postponing, and you can certainly do that. Have you seen that at any of your meetings where you postponed a discussion on a particular agenda item, maybe needed more information? So you've seen the postponement. Okay, that's good, that's good. How about a motion to refer something to a committee to study, to a subgroup or a subcommittee? So if you are technically a committee, you might refer it to a subcommittee. Have you done that in your meetings? referred to, tell me about something where you have actually referred an agenda item or topic to a different body. Wait.
I think our group, excuse me, has referred clarification or even a discussion till we have further information from the town staff.
It's usually about further information. Yeah, it's interesting you say that. So they would be getting that from the town staff? Okay, that's good. That's a good example of something where you would be referring for more information. Anything else where you've seen one of these?
Yeah, we don't, in PRAC and even in Parks and Trails Committee, we generally did not have any subcommittees on a lot of our, our public, our committees. So we generally refer to town staff for more information, maybe be a little more specific.
And when you've done that, Eric, how long did it take to come back to to the group for then some kind of action?
Usually, it would require 2 meetings.
2 meetings?
Yeah.
That's probably normal.
Yeah.
One meeting is nice, but it doesn't happen all the time. It's more often a couple of meetings. I was going to say that's pretty much the norm.
Another example of that, Eric, would be when we were working on youth sports policy, and we had the subcommittee working, and we took it back to the committee as a whole, and you asked the committee sent them back for additional information, additional work.
Yeah, that was
So
prior
we
to
refer
PRAC,
back.
and I was on a different committee because I was on Parks and Trails
Oh, perhaps,
and the other committee, right.
perhaps.
Yeah, good. Okay. So we're going to go about 5 more minutes, finish this topic, and then I'll be giving you guys a break. So another one, refer to the committee or amending. Amending is, it's a fairly common action in meetings. I would be curious about how often you see that happening in your meetings, but I would say it's certainly one of the more common ones that, that I would see people do. Have you seen any actions where somebody wanted to amend? And it's more, well, maybe when you do the scenario. Let's do the scenario. This will make more sense to you, because you might be thinking, Pat, didn't you just say we can't amend the agenda? Well, you can't amend agenda items, but you can always amend a motion. So let's see how page 13, scenario 2. Motion has been made to approve a grant request for $90,000. Harold is acknowledged by the chair and says, I move to amend the amount of the grant to $75,000. So talk with your partner, just ask yourself what might be going on there and in what order you should maybe let things happen. I'll give you about 1 minute.
I think that's legitimate, isn't it?
I think the motion,
We've had this happen before.
You would vote on that one first, wouldn't you?
I don't think so, because the second one is
Good
really,
question. I think that
What
is
would be the
the board
order?
would have
addressing.
to ask
Well,
that person
it's addressing this,
whether
but
they
would you
can concur
remove
with
this amount first in order to apply this amount? Or would
Well,
you, or are
they
you
become-
removing it from the agenda?
or would they do
altogether?
So this is kind of like, there's a motion on the floor to approve the grant request for That's correct. Then someone says, well, they're not in disfavor of the grant approval, just. That's correct. So. The question that I have is, would you have to remove the $90,000 as a motion? Because otherwise, you would approve the 75, then you would have to then. I think as chair, I can't remember what it's called, I think as chair, I would recognize, and acknowledged by the chair, and says, okay, I would say that I couldn't accept the amendment, but it is open for discussion. And I can't remember what they call it.
What?
The motion is on the floor, and then it's open for discussion.
Yeah, it's
Goes to further discussion.
to further a debate? Are you thinking of debate? That usually that's debate. One of the actions on a motion is debate, so you're debating the motion.
And when we do a motion, we ask if there's a motion on the floor, then I would ask, is there any other discussion? and then there isn't. So if I asked, was there any other discussion, this guy would say, yeah, I think it ought to be 75,000.
So you're not making, you're
Yeah, I
not
kinda think of-
amending the grant, but you're amending the amount
But doesn't the
specifically.
person who made the first motion have to accept the amendment?
This is good. I love the way you think about these things. This is great. What was your question, Marquise?
Doesn't the person who made the first, so you get a motion.
Right.
Somebody seconds it,
Right.
and this person makes a motion to amend.
Amend, yes.
But doesn't the person who made the initial motion have to accept that friendly amendment?
No, no, the group gets to vote on that. That's why, since it's a motion, the group is going to get to vote on Harold's idea about amending the amount of the motion. So, as Lee just pointed out, deal with that first. So the group has to first decide if they want the amount to be different before they even decide whether or not they will award the grant, whether they're going to approve that grant request. So they could refuse it. So think about this. If the group then decides, and did you all agree with that you had to deal with the 75,000 first? The amendment must be dealt with first.
And I think this has actually happened, Marquise, in some of our meetings. There will be a motion on the floor for us to vote on, and then there will be a second. And then I always ask, is there any other further discussion?
Which is debating the motion, which
Which is-
allows an amendment to come forth.
Which would be, this guy
Yes,
would say,
yes,
I
that's
want
the
it to
guy.
be 75 grand, and
Yep.
then we deal with that.
Yes.
Then we reframe the original motion.
Yes.
If necessary, and then we vote on it.
That's it. That's the answer right there. That is the perfect answer. Thank you so much. You have to deal with those items in reverse order, because since this came up as part of the discussion or debate, you can't just ignore it. You have to decide, is that valid? So let's say this group then says, let's vote on this motion to amend the amount to 75,000, aye or nay, and people say no. Then what happens? You go back to the first motion and you are approving a grant request for how much?
90,000.
90,000. And that may pass aye or nay. Now, if you go back to that amendment and that amendment passed, so Harold says, I'd like to amend it to 75,000, and people go, aye, I approve that. So now, the actual motion, and in fact, you would restate. I think it makes sense, you have to because now you actually have
I
a
always ask for it to be reframed.
reframed, restated, absolutely, they'd call it restating the motion, but reframe is a good thing that you're doing there. So the chair says, the motion on the floor is now to approve the grant request in the amount of $75,000. Now there are ayes or nays associated with that. So you can get all different kinds of combinations here. You could get a motion that was amended and you did change it to 75, or you did not change it to 75. You can have a motion that passes at 75 or it passes at 90 because the other, the amendment failed. So there's lots of different things that can happen here.
But does he as the chair have to accept that amendment?
Oh, yes. Well, he has to allow the amendment to come forth and call for a vote on the amendment. So yes, the chair is not allowed to say, Harold, shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. We're dealing with 90,000 here. Just forget about it. I mean, he can't do that. So the chair, because of these structured processes, says we have a motion on the floor to amend to 75,000, and let's call for a vote. Aye or nay. If the group doesn't want to do that, the group will shut him down because the group will say, nay. I mean, they will be the ones to make the decision. The chair doesn't have to do anything in that except just make sure that amendment is voted on and then the action is taken. So it gets the chair out of the position of ever having to make decisions on what people bring forth as a personal thing. The chair simply lets the group make those decisions as a vote. So it's very fair, very efficient. So Lee, you and Eric get A+ for that one. That was exactly the right order of handling all of those little steps on that particular motion. All right, let's look for 1 minute here at those other, those other subsidiary motions. I guess they had, I have them in your book there, the incidental and the privileged. And the privileged is the one where you're doing things like setting an adjournment time. Very minor, they say privileged, you think they're really important, but they're actually pretty minor. It's like adjourning or deciding in the middle of a meeting that you want to adjourn at a specific time. So you say, we're going to set the adjournment time tonight at 7:30. That means you better get through the rest of your agenda in a time frame that's going to let that happen. I mean, people even vote on things like, let's open the windows. So those are pretty much motions that affect how the group is doing its business. Now, the incidental ones, though, those are right there in the middle of page 13. A little more important because those are ones where you literally would withdraw something or you would appeal something. it can happen, it can happen that people can appeal a motion. So I would say I don't see it very often, but.
Can you explain that one?
So an appeal is where someone wants the motion to not be made that way. So Harold makes this motion of let's approve a grant request for $90,000, and this is how somebody says I don't want Harold to make that motion. They say I'd like to appeal that motion. So basically that's where the group can say, well, we're not even going to consider that, Harold. We're going to take it off the table. So if they vote yes on the appeal, then it's going to have to come out. Now Harold could withdraw. So I mean, you get into like the really, really fine points here. But so once Harold says, "Oh, you're appealing my motion. You're saying you don't want me to even say that. Fine, I'll withdraw it." So he can actually put out there to withdraw that motion. Then you can vote on withdrawing, and then it's off the table. So it can go off the table because it's appealed. Somebody's basically, when they appeal the motion, saying, "I don't think Harold should put that on the floor." A chair would say, "Let's vote on this appeal. Are we going to allow this motion to be on the floor? Aye, nay." And if people says aye, then it's still there. Then you could go into this whole thing where you amend it if you want to via the discussion. But first you have to decide if it's even on the floor or not. So the appeal would determine whether or not it stays on the floor as a motion. It can actually get pulled off by the group on the appeal. Or Harold can decide people are not liking what he's doing tonight, and he can just kind of back off and say, "I will withdraw that motion."
Ms. Pat, I have a question. Can the appeal only be applied to the motion, or can it be applied to an amendment?
The appeal could be applied to an amendment as well, because remember, an amending is a motion. This incidental motion that we're making here about appealing can apply to any motion, so it could apply to the amendment. So basically the group at that point is saying, we don't even want that amendment to be on the floor. So then, let's back it. We always have to go backwards. Leah's pretty good at this. You can help me, Leah, and make sure I do all the backward steps right. We now have to vote on whether the amendment should be allowed, aye or nay. Aye will allow us to go back and vote on the amendment itself. Nay is going to pull the amendment off, in which case, Lee, we go back to the original $90,000 grant request. Beautiful. Okay, we go back over here. Somebody appealed the amendment. They're basically saying, I don't think we should be doing that. And the group doesn't agree. There's people there who say, no, we should consider the $75K. So they vote down the appeal. They're basically saying to the one who's objected to that, because it's kind of like objecting. An appeal and an objecting are very, very similar. So you go back to that one, and the group says, no, we're not going to let that be on there. They say, okay, the motion to appeal has been denied, which means we are now with a motion on the floor for amending to $75K. So we vote on that, yay or nay. Then we go back and we figure out the grant request, yay or nay. So those are when it gets a little more complicated, when you start getting people attaching some of these incidental motions to that regular motion, that original main motion. When they start adding on stuff, that's when it gets a little more challenging for any of you who are participating in the action or any of you who are chairing that action. You really have to kind of keep all those little things in your head about what order they're supposed to go in. But so far you're doing it great. You're right on target here in knowing, how to deal with these. All right, so, and the other thing is you can do on your incidentals, you can talk about adopting reports. So when you bring a motion to adopt reports that are brought in, that's usually just considered one of the incidentals. Any question on these before we give you a quick break? And we'll be talking about voting when you come back, and then some of the posting times and other things related to minutes.